Today I'm showing y'all how you can make the softest and fluffiest bread that you can make. There's a secret ingredient to this bread. That secret ingredient is cottage cheese. You will not believe how soft and fluffy and wonderful the cottage cheese makes your bread. Today I'm going to use my bread machine dough cycle, but you can just as easily use a stand mixer to make these loaves. And I'll leave the directions on how to do that down in the recipe too. To make this really easy bread machine cottage cheese bread, I'm going to start with a half a cup of lukewarm water. I'm just going to put that right on into my bread machine loaf pan. You want this water to be about 100 to 110 degrees. That's going to be perfect for activating your yeast, but not too warm to kill it. Next, I'm going to use some cottage cheese. I'm going to add 1 cup of cottage cheese. Let's put that right on into your bread machine loaf pan with the water. This cottage cheese really is the secret ingredient to the softest, fluffiest bread. Now today I'm using this 4% milk fat, large curd cottage cheese, but you can also use lower percent milk fats, the small curd cottage cheese. You can also use the fat-free cottage cheese. I know because one time I bought the fat-free cottage cheese and I do not like it, and I used it up making this bread. So that works great too. So any kind of cottage cheese will be great. You want 1 cup right on into your loaf pan. And after the cottage cheese, then it's time for some butter. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of melted butter. This is salted butter, but you can also use unsalted butter in this recipe just fine. So 2 tablespoons. You can also substitute the butter with 2 tablespoons of any kind of oil that you'd like to use. And next we need 1 egg. So 1 large egg right on in there. Now let me show you these cute new eggs we're starting to get. These are from some hens that we raised as chicks this spring. So they just started recently laying. These are Easter egger hens, and don't they lay beautiful green eggs and brown eggs. I just love Easter eggers and Americanas. They're some of my favorite breeds. All right, after you add the egg, then you're going to want 1 tablespoon of sugar. You can also use 1 tablespoon of honey or maple syrup or monk fruit, anything you want to use, but just 1 tablespoon of sugar right on into your bread machine loaf pan. Now it's time for the flour. For this recipe, I'm going to use bread flour, but you can also use all-purpose flour. I've definitely done that in this recipe too. Either one you want to use, but I'm going to use 3 cups of bread flour. I do like bread flour better in my bread recipes. You'll just get a better chew, a better texture, a better rise out of your breads. But if all you have is all-purpose, then go ahead and use that all-purpose flour and make this bread. Now we might need to add a little bit more flour after our bread machine starts mixing and kneading our dough. We're going to check on our ball of dough and make sure we don't need to add a little bit more. But it is totally normal if you need to add maybe another 1/4 or even a 1/2 cup of flour, just depending on your humidity, the temperature, the time of year. Lots of things can factor into how much flour or water you need in this recipe. But for today, we're going to start with 3 cups and we might add a little bit more. Now it's time for our salt. I love this Redmond's Real Salt. This is what I use in all of my baking and cooking. Hopefully you can see it. It's a really pretty pink color. This is an ancient fine sea salt from North America. It's actually mined out of Utah. So this is kind of a neat salt, but I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of salt. Definitely don't pour it over your loaf pan. You might overpour and ruin your entire recipe right now. So don't do that right at the end. But I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of this salt. Now you can also use pink Himalayan sea salt. You can use white iodized table salt. Any of those will work just fine in this cottage cheese bread. And our last ingredient to add to this recipe is some instant yeast. Now you can also use active dry yeast. I've done that for this recipe too. But today I'm going to use the SAF instant yeast. This is a 1 pound brick of this yeast. This is definitely the way to buy it. So much cheaper than those little packs or those little jars that you see at the grocery store. And I store mine in the freezer and I get it out right in time to make bread. I don't have to let it come to room temperature or anything like that. And then I put it right back into my freezer and then it lasts forever that way. Okay, I'm gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. Now you can make a little well if you'd like to. That's how I started making my bread machine breads years and years ago, but you really don't need to. You can separate your salt and your yeast if you feel like you need to do that, but we're gonna get this mixing right now, and it really doesn't make a difference if your salt and your yeast touch. So let's go ahead and throw this in the bread machine and get it going. To make this cottage cheese bread, I'm using my Zojirushi Home Bakery Supreme bread machine. I love this bread machine. I've used lots of bread machines over the years, and this is my favorite. Okay, I have put my bread machine loaf pan into my bread machine. Now, you definitely want to get your bread machine loaf pan out of your bread machine before putting in all of the ingredients. Be sure you do that so you don't have any spills down in there. That can be a mess. This bread is really easy to make entirely in your bread machine. If you want to do that, just choose a basic white cycle. But I do really recommend making this bread using the dough cycle. It turns out way softer, way fluffier. So I'm going to use the dough cycle, but at the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly how it turns out when you make it entirely in the bread machine. So today I'm going to use the dough cycle, and I'm going to make 2 loaves of bread out of this recipe. You will be amazed at how soft and fluffy this bread is. Okay, so I'm going to use the dough cycle. I'm going to choose dough, and it's about an hour and a half, and I'm going to press start. And it gets mixing and kneading right away. Now, I do have my preheat turned off on this Zojirushi. Now, I'm going to let this go for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to check on my ball of dough. I want to make sure that the hydration is good. If it's too wet, it won't turn out. If it's too dry, it won't turn out. So I'll show you exactly what it should look like in about 5 minutes. It's been about 5 minutes, and it's time to check on my ball of dough. This is so important to do. Definitely don't throw all your ingredients in there and then close the lid and never look at it again. You will get much better bread if you check on your ball of dough. Okay, this one is looking good. It's not sticking to the bottom of the loaf pan. If it was, I'd add about a tablespoon to 1/8 of a cup more flour at a time. Give it a few minutes, check it again, and see if it's looking more like this one. If yours is looking really dry and crumbly, then you need to add about a tablespoon of water or milk. Give it a few minutes and try to make it look smooth like this. Now, so many things influence how much flour or water you need. It can even change day by day in your very home. The weather outside, the time of year, all really contribute to how much flour or water you need. But this one's looking great. It's tacky, not too sticky. Now I can confidently close the door of my bread machine, and in about an hour and a half, it's going to be time to shape this dough. It's been an hour and a half, and the dough cycle is complete. Look how well that dough rose. Now it's time to get it out of the bread machine and shape it into loaves. Let me show you a few options if you're using the dough cycle like I am today and baking your bread in the oven. The best size loaf pan for this amount of dough is this 10-inch by 5-inch cast iron loaf pan. This is the perfect size loaf pan for this amount of dough. So if I was just going to make 1 loaf, I'd use this loaf pan. But today I want to make 2 loaves of bread. Now I got this idea from my friend Cynthia, who took a 2-pound loaf, divided it in half, made 2 loaves. She and her family ate one, and they gave the other loaf to a friend. So what a great idea. Now, usually when I use my bread machine, I feel like I can only make 1 loaf of bread. Whether I totally make it in the bread machine or I use the dough cycle, I just feel like it just ends up being 1 loaf of bread. But if you make a larger amount of dough, divide it up into 2 loaves, then you can still make 2 loaves of bread. 2 smaller loaves, but still a great size. And like I said, this cottage cheese bread really rises. It gets so soft and fluffy, it'll really fill up these pans just fine. So today I'm going to use 2 loaf pans. Now, if you want to just use 1 loaf pan, you only have 1, and you made this amount of dough, you can definitely still bake it in this 8.5 by 4-inch loaf pan, or if you have a 9 by 5. It will just get really big in this loaf pan. It'll kind of mushroom out a little bit, but it'll still work just fine. I've done that before, and it ends up huge, but it's fine. So now it's time to turn this dough out from the bread machine loaf pan. So let's just turn it out. There we go. Looks like one of my paddles came out with the dough, and that is just fine. Just be sure to get that out. Oh, this is such nice dough. Oh, it feels so good. You can tell it's going to be really soft and fluffy bread. Okay, I'm just going to divide this in half. I'm just going to eyeball it. You can definitely weigh it, measure it if you want to, but I'm not that particular. All right, I'm going to take this dough and I'm going to press it out. And I want it to be about as wide as my loaf pan is long. These are 8.5 by 4.5 inch cast iron loaf pans. I prefer cast iron over everything else because they don't have any of those coatings or chemicals to get into our foods. So I just feel like it's a really good, healthy way to bake your bread. Okay, I'm gonna do the head down, shoulders in method. So I'm gonna pull the head down, pull the shoulders in, just like that, flatten it out with the palms of my hand, and then roll it into a nice, tight log. And then flip it over, press those seams together, pat it out. Now this might look like a little loaf, but I'm telling you, it is going to grow and expand and get much bigger than this. So now I'm gonna plop it into my cast iron loaf pan. Now I have prepared these loaf pans. I poured about a tablespoon of olive oil into the loaf pan, rubbed it all around the bottom, the sides, the corners, and my loaf won't stick at all. It'll just slide right on out when it's done. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing with this dough. I'm gonna just press it out. I'm gonna pull the head down, pull in the shoulders, press it out, and then I'm just gonna roll it into a nice tight log. If you do this, you'll have really good surface tension for your bread. You'll get a really pretty shape of bread when it's all done baking. It'll be domed and beautiful. Okay, pat it out a little bit. I'm just gonna throw this one into my loaf pan too. So now I have 2 loaves of bread. Now I'm gonna let these rise in the loaf pans just like this on the countertop. And how long it takes to rise will totally be dependent on the temperature of your home, your altitude. So many things depend on how long it's gonna take. But I like to say it's somewhere between 30 minutes and about an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. But you definitely don't wanna let these over rise. If they over rise, the texture of your bread is gonna be totally off. It can be too soft and your bread can totally fall apart as you're slicing it. So I'm gonna let these go. I'm gonna check on these in about 30 minutes and I'm gonna see if they've risen enough. I'll show you exactly what they should look like when it's time to throw them in the oven. Here's the dough for my 2 loaves of cottage cheese bread. These are ready to throw in the oven already. These have been rising for about 30 minutes. It is summertime, it's pretty warm in my home, so they rose pretty quickly. But you can see that even though I divided up the dough is still peeking up over the edge of the loaf pan. This is exactly what you want it to look like. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and throw these in the oven. I have it preheated to 350 degrees, and I'm gonna let these 2 loaves bake for about 28 minutes. And I'll show them to you when they're ready. I just got our cottage cheese bread out of the oven. Look how gorgeous these little loaves are. Didn't they rise so well? Like I told y'all, this bread just rises so well and it's so soft and so fluffy. So here are our 2 loaves. Now I'm gonna go ahead and turn these out from the loaf pan. I like to turn my bread out immediately from the loaf pan. Do you see how easily this loaf slid out from the loaf pan because we oiled it up really well? And the cast iron is just awesome. Okay, oh my goodness, these loaves, I can just tell, they feel so soft. These are gonna be so fun to eat, so soft, so fluffy. Now what I like to do is I like to take a little bit of melted butter. I just melted a little bit in my cast iron melting pot, and I like to just brush this butter on top of my loaves. This just gives you really good, soft crust, even softer than it already is. Gives you that nice buttery flavor, gives you that beautiful shine to your bread. It's a win-win-win. All right, that looks great. Now that's totally optional. You do not have to put any butter on top of your loaves, but I do like it. Now, instead of using a cooling rack, I like to just cover my loaves with a tea towel, a dry tea towel, and all that warmth, the condensation will give you even softer crust. These loaves don't really need much softer crust because they are already so soft, but I definitely like to do this instead of using a cooling rack. So I'm gonna let these cool just for a little bit. I hardly ever let my loaves cool off all the way because I love eating nice warm bread. But if you let yours cool off, you're gonna get a better texture, a better crumb from your bread. So I'm gonna let it cool for a little bit. We'll slice into them and check out these loaves. All right, I've let my bread cool just for a little bit and it is time to slice into it. Oh, just look how soft, how fluffy this bread is. Cottage cheese is definitely the secret ingredient to the softest and fluffiest bread that you can make. All right, oh, look at this. Oh my goodness, this looks so good. I definitely pulled out my bread bow knife because this bread is so soft and fluffy that it's really easy to squish. But if you use a bread bow knife and use this sawing action, it won't get squished. Look at this soft and fluffy bread. I know I keep saying that, soft and fluffy, but it really is. It is pillowy, it is light, it is airy. Oh, look at that. Look how soft, look how fluffy it is. It's totally squishy. I'm ruining this loaf, but that is okay. Oh, I love this bread. I'm gonna take a little bite of the heel. Let me just tell you, it is incredible. To keep this cottage cheese bread soft and fluffy, I'm gonna store it in one of our beeswax bread bags. My girls and I make these together right here on our family farm in our home. This is definitely how I like to keep my bread fresh. They'll be on my website, robinonthefarm.com. Now I'm going to show you exactly how a loaf of this cottage cheese bread turns out made entirely in your bread machine. You simply choose a basic white cycle. You still check on your ball of dough about 5 minutes after your bread machine starts. Once you know that your dough looks good, you can shut the door. In a few hours, you have this beautiful loaf of cottage cheese bread. This is a 1.5 pound loaf. Down in the description, I'll leave the link to the printable recipe, and I'll include the recipes for a 1 pound loaf, a 1.5 pound loaf, and a 2 pound loaf. I'll also leave the recipe in grams and in cups and spoons, depending on how you like to bake. For this bread machine loaf, I used the recipe for a 1.5 pound loaf. For my dough cycle loaves, I used a 2 pound recipe, divided the dough in half, and made 2 loaves. Now this bread does turn out great in the bread machine, but I really prefer it using the dough cycle and baked in the oven. It just turns out way softer and way fluffier. Hopefully you can see the difference between these slices and this loaf of bread. It still turned out great, but not nearly as soft and fluffy. So I recommend using the dough cycle and making this cottage cheese bread. I think it's a wonderful recipe. It has a slight tang to it because of the cottage cheese. And like I said, it's really soft and fluffy, probably the softest, fluffiest bread that I make. Be sure to check out my other really easy bread recipes, including lots of bread machine recipes. Thanks for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I'll see y'all next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each knead, ground wheat fresh, sowing her seed. The smell